The following month is mainly spent enjoying as much time as possible with my beloved family, and taking care of the recruitment drive for new regiments. It would take at least a year for all the Katakan recruits to gather and receive training and equipment, which was also the timeline the Speranza Spirit proposed to repair my Side Titan and upgrade the stockpiled vehicles with new sensors and Blackstone armor. Constructing a new park of better tanks and walkers will take longer, especially as I intended to expand the auxilia with 300 armor regiments, 100 heavy artillery and 600 heavy infantry regiments required for the Stygia sector campaign the next decade. Meanwhile, the machine forge was tasked with upgrading most of the cruisers and battle cruisers with Nova cannons and drop pod capability, as well as converting 40 transport ships into escort carriers, both for starfighters and bombers and torpedo corvettes. Since protecting the larger fleet carriers from chaos had proven very difficult, even in my presence with the Tesseract, I decided to focus on smaller carriers that wouldn't create so much loss when destroyed. Plus, this would allow me to disperse my forces more efficiently and cover a larger volume, while providing fighter escort for the capital ships. Forge World Retribution was still focused on mass-producing lighter vehicles, such as Weasel-like tanks, Sentinel walkers, Guardian and Tarantula turrets, plus large numbers of expendable attack drones and hunter-killer missiles. Of course, light units also had the largest casualties ratios, but that was the reality of war. In the past century the vehicle stockpile on Retribution had reached 500,000 Weasels and Sentinels, plus over 5 million attack drones. I could only hope they would be sufficient, even though these lightly armored vehicles were mainly meant to fight enemy infantry forces. Our Titans, Knights and Baneblade variants were the designated units to oppose heavy enemy units like the Tyranid Bio-Titans or the Orc Gargants. With massive air support from the attack drones and the light fighters, plus orbital parity with the enemy, we had a good chance of victory, even without considering the cheating I would provide with my Tesseract vision, tactical deployment and long-range bombardment. The armor regiments would slowly convert to the better Ragnarok templates, once sufficient tanks were manufactured, with Hydras and Chimeras providing anti-air and mechanized infantry support. As for our artillery regiments, the latest Manticore and Basilisk platforms would also be slowly replaced with Ragnarok chassis self-propelled artillery guns, with longer effective range and better sensors and targeting auguries. Using the small tactical Nova shells as artillery munitions will provide a 20-fold increase in firepower, even with the number of gun barrels remained the same. And lastly, the advanced weaponry obtained from the Tau will need to be tested and produced, at first for my Lamenters and Silent Sisters, then dedicated units from the Sisters of Battle and the better marksmen of the Katakan Auxilia. Sure, I would have liked an instant conversion to the brand new weapons, as well as the cool anti-gravity vehicles and powerful gravity shields, but I was also a realist. It would take probably an entire century for large numbers of advanced weapons and vehicles to be produced in sufficient numbers. Plus, it wasn't as my blank suns lacked Dark Age relics or potent shields. I did scour the vaults of the Mechonicus on Mars and Jupiter for thousands of forgotten relics, including power swords, heavy bolters, disintegration guns, ancient dreadnoughts and baneblades, and even some data stacks filled with ancient technologies. I deliberately abstained from stealing specialized units like Titans, dune crawlers or battle robots, since Mars would surely notice their absence, and worse, their curious presence over distant battlefields. In hindsight, this has proven right, since Speranza was able to manufacture even Warlord-class Titans with the right minerals and authorization. This has allowed my Deus Ex Machina Legion to transfer all their battle-ready Princeps to new Titans of potent might, and left the smaller Titans like the Warhounds and Reavers available for training or minor deployments with the new pilots. Given the approximate production cycle of about one Warlord Titan per year, in the 85 years since the Speranza had arrived at the Machine Forge, the Legion had reached 100 Warlord Titans and 200 smaller walkers, plus almost 500 knights of various classes and 900 baneblades. They weren't my upgraded versions, so it will take some work to modify them, but they did provide a giant armored force to oppose similar powerful enemies. Also, as expected, Brother Semnai had little problem defending the Gilded Stars from Tau encroachment, holding them firmly at Prefectia and gathering allies from the fringe for our future campaign to liberate the human worlds still occupied by the Tau. The Iron Hands and a dozen of their successor chapters had signaled their interest in joining the new crusade, and a dozen Ordo Zeno Inquisitors were also gathering ships and troops, plus a number of rogue traders and Adeptus Auroritas Priories seemed quite incensed to participate, for various reasons. The Imperial Navy was already present with the Indomitus Third Fleet under Lady Cassandra, and 100 Cadian infantry regiments from the Astra Militarum were sent by a certain Primarch to bolster the occupation forces of the Prefectia Crusade. Yes, Primarch L. Johnson of the Dark Angels was the one to command those guardsmen into my army. Seemed quite strange, until Lady Valane explained how the Cadians would remain there permanently and deny my house the opportunity to extend my influence over a new galactic sector. Damn it. Why do I have to endure such pressure from the Lion? I don't have any beef with him, if he would just leave me alone. I grumbled as I lay down on my pillow, and my new wife rested on my shoulder. Perhaps your military feats are eclipsing him. Perhaps you argued with him in public. Perhaps you kicked out his envoys from your domain? Or maybe you took away the gifts you sent from the rock? Even embarrassed him in front of the Emperor. Does any of these seem possible? Valane wondered a bit rhetorically. I did do all of that, although I had good reasons for it. It's still petty. It's not my fault his own sons have placed him in a stasis pod then forgot about him for 10,000 years, I muttered in disgruntlement. See. You do not treat other Primarchs like this. The Lion has every reason to be prideful, as a demigod made from the Emperor's own flesh. His strategic genius is renowned all over the galaxy. His sons fought for humanity on 1,000 worlds. He even liberated Armageddon. The Inquisitor claimed a bit too fervent. Yes. But he also burned down human worlds, and was about to exterminate the space wolves, because their own Primarch is missing. I argued back in a harsher voice. Valane sighed and patted my chest gently. Mistakes were made. But this cycle has to stop. The next time you meet, you better solve this, Pef Lancefire. She warned me in a calming voice. Damn it. If the Lion was such a genius, how come half of his sons turned against him and became the Fallen? Hopefully Ferrus Manus will not be a dick too, after I managed to resurrect him. I had too many enemies already. With that thought, I fell asleep and dreamed of alien beasts and a green-dressed goddess drinking vials of poison. Probably my inflated imagination. Luckily, I woke up with a more pleasant feeling, as Elixir de Mornay was taking care of my morning mood with her pretty red lips. Morning, Elixir. I quipped and gently trailed my fingers through her red hair. In the room's corner, Ludvius held his thumb up for encouragement. I winked at my bodyguard and allowed Elixir her prize. With a pop, she rose and started riding me while pawing over my chest and abdomen with grabby hands. There are a pair of bouncy sisters outside, Lord Pef. I had to enter through the vent to gain the first place. She disclosed in a prideful tone, while I was mesmerized by her own bouncing assets. Finally, Serena had granted me those two sisters. And they even came equipped with extensive child-rearing capabilities, providing sufficient nutrition for 4 hungry children at once. Of course, I would need to test the equipment myself, for many hours. But I didn't mind that at all. It might be my duty, but I was allowed to enjoy it, right? And how are the Obsidian Auguries performing? I asked in doublespeak. Oh, our Lord and Master is eager to meet the new recruits in our shady organization. Well, 2 of your Emperor's daggers have passed away while undercover with the Gene Stealer cult. But there are still 10 of them that are arduous to rekindle your connection. As for the other operatives, we have reached almost 1 million total membership. We are spread out over 1,000 planets here in the fringe, and have covered bases set up all over the segmentum, on most hive worlds and some civilized worlds, as well as cold trade dens and smuggler heavens. By the way, we will need 1 trillion thrones to repay all the operating expenses. Spying is not cheap. Elixir explained vocally while the accounting details flowed over the manifold into my mind impulse unit implant. It was a lot of money, but a century of large-scale surveillance was indeed not easy. From safe houses to fake identities and advanced cogitators for hacking and data processing, to covert strike teams and stealth shuttles for insertion, the Obsidian Auguries have grown tremendously in scope, and also in costs. The Lancefire dynasty has supported them over the years with black books accounts and transportation on the rogue trader ships, but nobody expected the organization to grow so large my absence. Still, I wasn't a poor trader anymore, and also had the looted thrones from Shadowbrink and Vigilus and many other places I have visited. It wasn't like locked vaults and hidden treasury chambers were beyond my tesseract's reach. Don't worry, my dear. You did well, but we will need to expand the auguries at least 10 times over the next century. The Tyranid hive mind is now present in the warp, and we will need to prepare for extra numbers of genestealers popping up everywhere. Astartes Ludvius here will help you train and design better procedures for your operatives. And perhaps a few Ordo Xenos Inquisitors will help too, once they arrive. I replied in a wise manner, then returned my attention to her bouncing peaks and began climbing again. One by one, the task forces began leaving to fight the Orcs, often just as soon as 12 regiments gathered at their muster points. Comprised of 10 infantry, 1 artillery and 1 armor regiments, these task forces were the incipient formation of a modern mechanized division, with sufficient troops and firepower to counter varied types of enemies and unit compositions. In total, each of these divisions would be comprised of 120,000 auxiliary guardsmen, with 8,000 vehicles of different types and specializations, from armed sentinels, to anti-air hydras, weasel-like tanks, self-propelled guns and a formidable corps of 20 Baneblade heavy tanks spearheading 300 main battle tanks, mostly Lehman Russ patterns but also some new Ragnaroks. In the Astra Militarum, such a large concentration of tanks would need to gather 10 armor regiments, and hope they had full rosters. My hope was to send them into medium-level battles against stupid enemies like orcs, so they gain experience and confidence, before concentrating them into a large army. Their officers had the best training I could afford, from a decent general education to a good military academy, even some time in Astartes-class neural chairs. They would have drop cruisers to provide tarantula turrets in harder battles, as well as a few tech marines with hundreds of their guardian walkers to intervene in desperate clashes. A few companies of Adeptus Auroritas and a pair of Silent Sisters would also depart with each division to provide special circumstances support, both against Psyker Orcs and other potential enemies. Just because you went to fight Orcs didn't mean you might not encounter other species, or even demons. The objectives I gave the aspirants were simple and easy to understand. Protect the population, the industry and the cities and minimize collateral damage where possible. Obviously, they would need to adapt to local conditions, such as weather, terrain, local language or customs, even obstructions from local nobles or priests. But how they dealt with such problems was actually their test, since I could now afford to be selective in accepting new lamenters as replacements. However, as long as the aspirants completed their mission successfully, I could always transfer them to a different chapter in need of blank recruits, and adjust their destination depending on proved traits like aggression or charisma or sheer brutality. All Astartes were fine warriors anyways, due to extensive training and neural lessons, but personality traits were as varied as all humans had. Better to send them to fight along brothers of a similar mentality, than be miserable among the lamenters. In the past century, Victor had transferred thousands of blanks to a number of local chapters that pledged to abide by the Lancefire rule, which was simply to not murder our recruits in stupid training or hazing exercises. By now, there were 30 blank companies among the Blood Angels and their successors, as well as Blood Ravens, Black Dragons, Salamanders and even some Space Wolves. The number of their tech marines had also increased dramatically, which also provided increased combat effectiveness from repaired vehicles and armor, plus additional firepower in dire need. As the year passed, the last auxiliary groups embarked for Kronga and Devrad, each of these armies consisting of 100 auxiliary regiments with knights support and a few titans. They also had much larger air power forces in support, because wars were always dangerous, even if you thought you had prepared enough. The rules of reality bent to favor the Orcs, and their illogical maneuvers often resulted in surprising victories even against formidable defenses. Even impenetrable Forge worlds have fallen to Orcwas, when they shouldn't have had even 1 in a trillion chance at victory. To counter stupid tricks I've sent my better generals with the troops, Regina and Janet, formerly from the Valhallan all-female regiment. The 2 women had already carried their pregnancies to term and had to leave their blank babies in the nursery, but needs must. We had a galaxy to defend, and our children would carry on with the duty when we died. Are you certain I need to stay behind and act as Spymaster? My old friend Ludvius asked with an unhappy voice. I should return in a few years, brother. But, I do worry of some scheme that might befell my capital. Be it chaos or Genestealers, maybe some revengeful Dark Eldar. Maybe all of them and more. I did make a few enemies, I admitted in a heavy voice. Ludvius nodded thoughtfully, then tapped his bionic eye. I shall install more bastion fields and extra turrets then. And I do have your Xeno pistol in case something big comes through. He replied with a grin, while patting his hip where he holstered a Necron dimensional gun. Sure, I had a Jokero artisan work it over and convert the gun into a combi bolter with Imperial design, but the second barrel was able to trap even a Titan into a dimensional pocket. The Canticle was finishing loading up the last invasion Cathedral of the Sisters of Battle from Sanctuary, because I had a mind to produce more blank sisters as fast as possible. An entire priory of 4,000 young women should provide me with plenty of entertainment in the completion of this duty, starting with the new Canoness and going down the ranks as time went by. Already their gene pool had been dominated with the Katakans, since the Sisters of Battle were quick to recognize the formidable abilities of the Katakan women. From increased reflexes, resilience and mental fortitude, to unwavering loyalty and courage, the new breed of sisters were ideal for the role of relentless heroines. Sister Stern, along with a company of silent sisters and a dozen knights, plus a dozen auxiliary regiments had departed for San Lior to rescue their besieged sisters, while Al-Besalam piloted my destroyer Psi Titan, until the Speranza figured out how to reconstruct his trashed Titan. Sending the regular soldiers was slightly overkill, since a single Psi Titan would be sufficient, even without Ephrael Stern boosting its powers 20 times. But anyways, better safe than sorry, and with chaos you were always better off with more guns on your side. Docking complete, Lord Pef. We are ready to depart, Larissa announced from her captain chair. I nodded and patted Ludvius on his shoulder, then displaced him back in the Null Hive, where he had a gigantic spying network to oversee. I'll be in my bed till Prefecture, I advised the ship's captain, then simply walked out from the bridge on my own 2 feet, like an ordinary person. Knowing smiles and grins flashed behind me, as the bridge crew snickered at my incoming duty. Soon enough, the Overlord-class battlecruiser sped away towards the Tau frontier, escorted by several carriers and Lamentor strike cruisers. Canis lifted a lazy ear to acknowledge me as I entered my rooms, then yawned politely. A minute later, a polite knock on the door signaled the leader of the Sisters and her Seraphim squad had arrived to have a long and fruitful meeting for the betterment of mankind. Lady Bella, you're even prettier than I've been told, I remarked in surprise, taking sight of the Canoness in her full battle regalia. The woman had the classic silver hair of every sister, but her body and face were completely angelic. She smiled a bit sadly. I was not elected for my beauty, my lord. In fact, it has been a hindrance to my service for the Emperor, Lady Bella murmured demurely. I nodded and offered her my plasteel chair, that was certified to withstand the weight of power armor. I do understand, Lady Bella. I got this face from being implanted with Primarch Sanguinius gene seed. Sometimes, I feel like punching a mirror. The woman chuckled a bit amused and seemed to relax a little. Going by your fame and exploits, I'd have thought you'd take pride in your looks. You do look nice. The battle sister mused while her companions nodded in agreement. I'm not a great warrior, my lady. Better than a neophyte recruit, but that's about it. I've been beaten and crushed by traitor marines, or even by lawless Statis that didn't like my words or genes. All my battles were won with my mind, and the null genes. I confessed with a shrug, then produced an expensive bottle of sweet liquor in crystal glasses. There would be time enough for love. First we had to establish some trust and common ground, by sharing stories both good and bad. People always saw the Sisters of Battle as unflinching witch hunters with burning faith and heavy flamers. And while this was true, they were also women with their own feelings. They were a bulwark against the terror despite their fragile bodies, and I could respect that. It was easy to battle Xenos or traitors when you had 8 feet of bulky muscle and durasteel sinew to push you forward, as well as brains neurally cleaned of fear or doubt. However, I knew how frail a normal human was against a Chaos Marine, because I have been that human once. And now, you want those blank genes spread among everyone in this Lancefire sector, just as you recruit the Lamentors and even the new governors. The Canoness said after sipping a bit of liquor. Humanity is slowly dying, my lady. We fall behind in technology and the Imperium is torn apart by heretics and traitors, turned by chaos or genestealers. We have not invented new weapons or technologies, because chaos infects our machines or engineers when we stray from the STCs. I explained with a sigh, and gulped a glass of liquor to make a point. The sisters followed suit, downing their glasses and getting a bit red in the face. And you say we should all become heretics, once we are blanks and safe of these perils? Lady Bella wondered with a warning tone. I'm saying we can be better. Right now, I have to gather a crusade to stop the Tau from slicing off an entire galactic sector, although they were crafting bone spears 6,000 years ago. But they can advance so fast because they are all blanks. There are no ghosts and demons inside their new machines or cogitators, because the warp can't even see them. In a few centuries, they will rival our ancestors from the age of technology, and will battle the Necrons on equal terms. I answered in a sad voice, while pouring more liquor to my guests. A couple of glasses later, we all agreed we had to make humanity even better. Beginning from my bed. A crusade against a Xeno Empire is different from a liberation crusade of Imperial worlds. The standard Imperial tactics would require total extermination, and then perhaps sifting through the ruins to recover valuable artifacts or technology. I have even taken part in the Ghoul Stars crusade against the Scyther Fiends, the one where Primarch Sanguinius took command and made a mess of things. For the Tau, I had different plans though. Burning planets would not recover my investment, after all. Thus, I spent a whole month at Prefectia instructing my officers, and the other commanders that arrived to help with the crusade. We had maps and estimations on the Tau forces, by the grace of the Ordo Xenos and some local rogue traders. We had enough ships and ground units to conquer the entire Tau species, although it would be very costly. However, I did not want that. Only half. I'm modest like that. I want their researchers captured. I want their labs intact. I want their factories and shipyards as undamaged as possible, I demanded in a loud voice. The Cadian colonels and the navy captains looked down and muttered to themselves, while the Adeptus Auroritas and the Astartes captains glared at me with burning eyes. One of them quite literally, because he was a psyker. You're making this conquest much harder than it has to be, Lord Lancefire. We have no need for filthy Xenos technology or their scientists, a certain sister declared in a proud voice. I sighed inward and mentally shifted her congregation to another target, a far-side enclave, replacing them with a Lamenter company and 5 auxiliary regiments in the battle order for that sept world. Please, Sister Beatrice. You need to consider what other groups in this crusade need. The Mechanicus certainly needs that Xenos tech. The rogue traders also need intact installations and valuable artifacts to recover their costs. The Ordo Xenos is mandated to examine the tech as well. I pleaded in a tired voice. On the large hololith screen, the field deployment changed to slot in the battle sisters under Beatrice into their new positions. Fine. My sisters and I will fight to return the captured humans to the light of the God Emperor. And, try not to burn more than necessary. The woman allowed in a steely tone. I smiled pleasantly and pointed at the other end of the nexus, which emerged somewhere west of Car_Dunyash, the main producer of Dominator_cruisers and the Ultima Segmentum. And because these cruisers also had a Nova cannon, this raised the importance of the fortress world to absolute. Vital for the security of the Imperium, especially against the Tyranids. Lady Callistrati, you and the Black Dragons will need to secure Car_Dunyash at all cost. We are not certain how many Tau ships have already traversed the rift into Imperial territory, so be careful, I continued with a nod towards the friendly Inquisitor. Several other Inquisitors raised a finger to signal their interest, and were added to the task force prepared to cross the rift and cleanse the Tau incursion. They came with warships and their own Stormtrooper regiments, their troops upgraded to Lamenter Auxilia standards from my own stores of spare vehicles, plus each had been granted a Death Watch company from my reserves of Astral Claws, so their help would certainly speed up the reconquest. Of course, I wasn't actually worried about a Tau push into the heart of the Imperium, mainly because the Tau lacked fast FT engines, and their methods required a slow advance with lots of defenses and logistical bases. The Tau were not orcs, to rush headforward into battle. They would consolidate their gains in the Nem_Ya_atoll first, and that gave me plenty of time to strike directly at the Tau heartland, conquer the Nexus gateway, and then lock the tower behind me. And with that final check, the Damocles Crusade was ready to begin. The Lamenters and my Blackstone Fortress took the worst job, which was the Nexus itself and its formidable defenses, while the rest of the crusading troops were spread out for a simultaneous strike at 40 Tau systems. A week later, the Black Lament plowed through the railguns and torpedoes and mines that protected the stable rift into the Ultima Segmentum. My starfighters and corvettes began clearing up the overwhelmed static defenses, while I began filling my second tesseract with hundreds of Tau ships, advanced bombers and fighters and any movable tech I could grab. In less than a day, we had the far end of the Nexus secured and I began deploying my own static defenses, starting with the upgraded Aegida Fortress and then thousands of asteroid forts and Mechonicus-made minefields. Lady Ambly remained on the Aegida to begin interrogations and thousands of tech priests from Forge Retribution emerged from their Ark Mechonicus to examine the captured technology. Leaving the fortress behind, I boarded the Singularity battleship, flanked by 7 other battleships of my dynasty and entered the rift to clear the Imperial side, and then establish a trading port copied after Footfall, the Rogue Trader Haven and the Expanse. I didn't have a name yet for this new port, but the majority of my clan already named it Port Lancefire. It would take a decade and major work from the tech priests to connect thousands of asteroids with void steel chains and raise buildings and artificial gravity generators, but I expected the port to become profitable even sooner. There were already 54 rogue trader ships in this crusade, and the news would spread fast to others in our profession. Profit was a great motivator, after all. Less than a week later, after the first defenses came online at the Aegida Nexus, I continued the advance towards the major sept world of Daleth. Without qualms about cheating, I began filling the Tesseract with ships and panicked locals, while with my good Tesseract I deployed the occupation troops and an initial batch of colonists. Daleth had been a water-caste world, thus it was filled with factories and trading depots, with goods from 1,000 different worlds being offered in trade. There were also dozens of embassies from various minor species hosted here, which were of great interest to the Ordo Xenos. Since the Imperium rarely allowed for diplomatic relations with Xenos, learning how other races managed would be quite important. From Daleth, I once more boarded the Singularity and departed in a rush for the Tau world of Quillen where some unexpected events took place. Sure, in war there are always surprises, but this time in was an Astartes chapter, the Raptors that were involving themselves in my crusade, without even sending me notice. After a quick status report, it came to light that the Raptors were asked by the governor of Dolumar_4 to abduct an ethereal leader and bring him back. Task which they almost accomplished, until they were ambushed by a large Tau fleet consisting of 5 modern battleships and a dozen cruisers. Their single battle barge was nearly failing by the time my fleet arrived, and they had already lost 3 strike cruisers and 9 Gladius frigates. Possibly not very inspired of them, to attack the Tau as they were on a war footing against a crusade. "What do you think, Inquisitor?" I asked with a suffering voice, towards Lady Valane. The Inquisitor glanced at the ongoing space battle on the screen, then sighed. "If you have enough forces, stay and conquer the Quillen system as well, Lord Pef. I'll go solve this governor problem, but I will need Sister Decima, just in case," she claimed in a cold voice with holding out her silver cube. "Take the Canticle then." I offered and deposited the Overlord battlecruiser near the Singularity. It was the fastest ship I had available, and it also had the most modern weapons and defenses. By the time the battlecruiser sped away for Dolumar, carrying 3 Death Watch companies and a squad of Silent Sisters led by the Omega-level Decima, I was already dropping my troops on Quillen and clearing off the last remains of the Tau Navy. Of course, I could conduct these maneuvers with my eyes closed by now, and even engage in polite conversation with my guests at the same time. "Master Lias Isidon, here is what is going to happen. Because you and your chapter have volunteered to take part in the Damocles Crusade, I will give you a fair chance to recover your losses. Your barge, the War Talon, will be repaired and upgraded, and your chapter will receive 5 new cruisers and 20 destroyers to replace what you've lost." To my side, the chapter master of the Raptors simply nodded, waiting for the other foot to drop. "We are very grateful for the rescue, Lord Lancefire," he muttered a minute later. "I am certain you are, Master Isidon. I will even provide your Chapter 100 blank recruits and training for 1,000 tech marines over the next decades. However, there will be a price. Your Raptors will remain here, in the new sector we are conquering from the Tau, and provide security for the human colonists. You will raise 1,000 auxiliary regiments and enforce imperial law, in conjunction with the Astra Militarum and the Navy. I suggest you base your chapter at Daleth, where a new Forge world will be made to exploit the technology of the Tau, I demanded in a forceful voice. The man glared at me for a second, then turned his eyes back on the screen, where the Leviathan Dreadknights were battling the advanced Tau warsuits and grav tanks. Any chance we may receive a few Leviathans? He wondered in a sad tone. Of course, my friend. Every blank Astartes will be gifted one. I take care of my children, I answered with a wry smile. Plus, it was only fair that the Imperium based the new sector at the same place where the Youth_Treaty was signed some 300 years ago, after a major defeat of Imperial forces. Over the next year, the Crusade proceeded as planned, not that the Tau were able to match the array of forces deployed against them. My forces advanced as deep as Kelson into Tau territory, where we first had to fight off the Purge, a large Chaos warband with a predilection for chemical weapons. Then, minor incursions from Orcs and some Eldar Corsairs, followed by a large Genestealer invasion carried by 9 space hulks that emerged from the Perdu_Rift. Free ship hulls and gigatons of precious metal would make the development of this new sector much easier, even with the stupid regulations of the Administratum. I kept 1 space hulk to distribute the more intact hulls to the other rogue traders, and grabbed 1 more battleship and 3 battlecruisers for my own house. The ships would need decades in dock to be restored to operational status, but in the meanwhile they will provide work for my Forge worlds in the fringe. The cruiser hulls will need to be transported to more advanced forges like Metallica or Tigris, because the smaller Macarius drives required a high degree of precision. The Tau did not stay still and let us conquer them, and struck back from inside the Nexus pocket, and with 2 large fleets that tried to pincer the Crusade the Rift and reconnect with their lost colonies. They didn't stand a chance, but still they tried. I was happy to fill my Tesseract with more Tau ships, as well as advanced battlesuits and remote drones. These machines will need to be reverse-engineered and refitted for human use, then I could equip the next wave of colonists with better vehicles. Of course, just the Mechonicus tech priests were not enough for such a task, which is why I retained nearly 1 billion Tau specialists in my Tesseract for follow-up development outside the Imperium. The Iron Hands and their successors also took charge of a number of reconquered systems including the Taros_ system, which anchored the new sector with another powerful base. Meanwhile, on Dolimar 4, Sister Decima and my lovely Inquisitor wife found themselves caught in a chaos blot involving a pocket dimension filled with demons, a corrupt governor and the usual effects of an Eldar Farseer's failure to solve a problem. Turns out this Farseer had simply cut off a segment of the webway to imprison a demon army, then left it forgotten until the humans arrived and had to clean up the mess. I wasn't very happy either, since the debacle has cost me 5 dead Silent Sisters and 233 dead Death Watch Marines, plus millions of dead PDF and guardsmen from the local garrison. In comparison, the entire Damocles Crusade took the lives of 219 Astartes, of which 6 were Lamenters and less than 1 million Militarum soldiers, most of them from the Cadian regiment sent to bolster our numbers by Primarch Iljohnson. Lady Amberley remained on the Aegida to conclude a new treaty with the Tau, appropriately called the Sword of Damocles. However, I had no time for diplomatic games, and moved my fleet and most of the Crusade through the Rift, and headed towards Kar Dunyash, to exchange part of the loot for new Dominator cruisers and extra munitions. A single space hulk had enough metal to construct 1,000 cruisers, so the shipyards were happy to trade me 10 new cruisers for this once-in-a-lifetime deal. I also kept my bargain and donated 5 of them to the Raptors chapter, and even gave them blank captains from my own house. It is hard to please a large clan of rogue traders that always expect to command a capital ship, but I do my best. 3 weeks later we made haste towards the Evrard system to take part in the ambush at Narian_Eve. And thus, we made it just in time for our forces to recapture from the Orcs a dozen unfinished battlecruisers at Port Vul. The Forge world was happy enough for my help that 2 of the Mars battlecruisers were transferred in my care, and they got 10 of them back to be delivered to the Navy upon completion. My aspirants were already skirmishing with the orcs, in hit-and-run strikes among the asteroid field, while our auxiliary troops and the tech marines provided defense for many shipyards and asteroid forts. Also, the Space Wolves were inbound with a battle barge called the Axe_of_Rus, which stood little chance against 1,000 orc ships. The following battle was a textbook lancefire withdrawal and envelopment, that netted us a modified ironclad battleship called the Kill_Wrecker and the head of Gazgal_Mag_Rurik_Throcker, 114 kill cruisers and 577 orc escorts captured, in exchange for 4 frigates and 7 corvettes lost by the Crusade. Although I allowed Blademaster Khan the honor of dueling the infamous orc boss, he was still upset. I just made sure the war boss wouldn't run away. Which feat would be difficult without legs. You melted his legs off. The White Scar captain complained while holding the head of Gazgal in his left hand. I shrugged innocently, and nodded. This orc has escaped from Primarch Iljohnson at Armageddon. Fast on his feet, or so I heard. A soft snort from Lady Vilaine warned me I was stepping on thin ice with the lethal Swordmaster. Stop helping, damn rookie. The Blademaster grumbled and kicked the head away in disgust. The giant head rolled for 100 meters and fell off the deck, then bounced away towards a trash chute that would be emptied before we departed the system. I kept watch in disbelief with my Tesseract vision as the head continued an unlikely adventure to escape my ship, then bounce off towards a lifeless moon in the distance. One of my patrolling corvettes clipped the orc head and changed its trajectory towards a Mechonicus shipyard where the tech priests were already working to restore an orc escort to its former Imperial destroyer status. With a raised eyebrow, I kept watch, and followed the rolling head as it was once more clipped by a construction robot and rolled onwards towards a medical ward. I mean, there is luck, and then there was this. I didn't doubt Gazgal would manage to restore himself to life and escape, if left alone. Damn critter was already getting his head mounted on a defective servitor. I snapped my fingers and deported the orc head and the traitorous servitor into the sun, then kept watch for a few seconds until they got vaporized. A second later, I stepped away and out from my power armor, to enjoy a warm shower and then a whole day of sleep. Major battle was still tiresome, especially when splitting my attention a million ways to keep watch over my troops and enemy movements, not to mention stealing ships and exploring hidden vaults with the Tesseract. I had barely landed in my bed, when the door opened to allow Lady Cassandra, my Navy Admiral, into my room. "Yes, my lady," I muttered in a sleepy voice. "What can I do, to be given this captured battleship?" the Lady Admiral asked in a straightforward voice. I grumbled a tired sleep and drifted off. Minutes later, a soft body climbed beside me in bed and hugged me tight. I think I heard an amused snicker from under the bed, which I promptly ignored. A dozen hours later, I opened my eyes to stare into the medium bosoms of my admiral, who was already awake. "Cassandra?" I uttered in fabulous logic. "I did what you asked, my lord." "Is this enough?" she asked in a coy voice, glancing down at her chest. I sighed inward and poked her breasts in revenge, then teased a pink nipple between my fingertips. "You don't need to sleep with me, my lady. And you already have command over 100 capital ships." Instead, the woman glared at me for a long minute. "Maybe I do want to. Maybe I also want blank daughters that get to roam the galaxy freely, and commanding their own battle cruisers," she answered in a soft voice, and stretched her hand to grope at my biceps. "Well then, put it this way, I could spare a battleship for the mother of my children." Becoming a lancefire is dangerous. I warned the woman before she took the last step. Cassandra snorted and climbed on top of me with a wry grin. "We've been to hell and back already. I think we're way past dangerous by now." I grinned back and drew her into a kiss. I never slept with an admiral before. It took 6 more months to travel the sector and squash the last remaining orc invasions, while also gathering my dispersed Lamentor auxiliary divisions and aspirants, then reviewing their combat records. More ships and troops arrived from the reconquered town M_Ya_Atoll, as my Inquisitor lovers lead 1,000 newly raised regiments and 3 night houses they have recruited to cleanse the Blue Xenos from the Imperium. They had managed to liberate the occupied human worlds, but dealing with small detachments of fire warriors from the tower was completely different from what will be needed to halt the Tyranids. Perhaps, have them all entrench in bunkers and guard the hive cities? I mused in a doubtful voice, while going over the rather flimsy equipment these new regiments had. Older models of las guns and field las cannons, with barely any mortars or armored vehicles. Some of these units even lacked flak jackets or helmets. In the strategy room, my generals and captains grimaced with disappointment. We can pair each of these regiments with one of the auxilia, and have them form skirmish lines or aid in the static defenses. Here, in the Vitria system, maybe? Captain Semnai wondered in a doubtful tone, while pointing at the second Tyranid tendril on the holomap. The Tyranid hive fleet had split into 3 major tendrils, and Vitria was right in the middle. I planned to use the bulk of my forces in the Satis system to halt the bug's advance from below the galactic plane, then strike across the base of the other tendrils and cut them off with my fleet. However, perhaps the new troops could also hold at Vitria. Not by themselves, but then the Blood Angels and all the other successor chapters were also gathering to defend Bale. Also, Sanguinius has not been idle and had founded 20 more chapters using his own gene seed. They still did not have enough tech marines or auxiliary forces, but 20,000 extra Astartes were quite a potent force anyway. Very well, brother. You will have command over the Vitria war theatre. Lady Callistrate, is that all right with you? I asked politely. The Ordocenos Inquisitor bit her lower lip in deep thought, then nodded. I fear we will not have enough. I sighed inward, but such was the state of the Imperium. Too many enemies, not enough guns. There are more human forces incoming, forged worlds and rogue traders, beside the 9 battle fleets of the Imperial Navy. And once I win at Satis, I will come and strike the bugs from behind, I concluded in a certain voice. My officers raised their eyes from the holotable to stare at me, probably due to my outrageous victory claim, then smiled or shook their heads in amusement. Still, not one of them doubted me. It was already an established fact. Wherever Pef Lancefire fought, he would win. No matter the odds. Just make it quick, my lord. I estimate we can hold for at most 3 weeks, with only 1,000 regiments and 100 knights. Semnai complained in a lamenting voice. I'll be there in 2. I boasted with a grin, then vanished from the room. Back in my quarters, I still had some fucking duty to finish. The last squad of Sisters of Battle from Sanctuary, then right back from the start. Inquisitors, Silent Sisters, Titan Princeps and various other women in need for blank children. In just 2.5 years I managed to produce 5,000 new blanks, by judiciously impregnating my allies based on a tight schedule overseen by a couple of Order Familias sisters and an old Inquisitor with a young body. Lady Valane appeared next to me in the shower and pawed at my wet skin with grabby hands. When do you want me, husband? First in line, or after you seduce the pure battle sisters? She murmured while helping me soap. My lance sprang into battle formation, so I leaned into a kiss. Such a dedicated wife, I might reward her twice. Much later, I sent the exhausted sisters back to their dorm, and leaned back with my eyes closed. Valane rested on my chest, and sighed happily. In the corner, a giant wolf sighed softly and went back to sleep. It has been a long day, but my new body could take it now. 11 women in a single day, I sure had a blessed life, didn't I? I woke up the next day to find Sister Fidelia and Lady Day in my bed, licking my body with teasing tongues. Although it was time to depart for war, I made a bit of time to enjoy the 2 women and fill them with positive energy. A few hours later, I was already leading the Singularity and its battleships and cruisers fleet on harassment strikes on the southern Tyranid tendril. If killing and crippling 1 million bioships per shot could be considered mere harassment. The Void Claw gravity cannon of the Gloriana battleship was certainly effective on the bugs, as even the bioships that did not explode under their own mass remained behind to be strafed by the cruisers and annihilated. For now, I avoided spending precious Nova shells and mines, because the Tyranid numbers were far too large for classic munitions to matter. At the edge of the Satis system, the Black Lament with 6,000 corvettes and 90,000 starfighters for escort formed the anvil, while Al-Besalam, Vadrax and other Blank Sisters rotated constantly to fire the Immaterium beam at the incoming Tyranid swarm. Fields of asteroid forts and mines formed a defense perimeter around the Blackstone fortress, while the lighter ships struggled to reduce the myriad of flyers and spores advancing ahead of the Hive fleet. Even so, the Black Lament had to retreat every day under the constant Xeno assault, falling back to a secondary fort line, then a tertiary, and so on. A week later, my roving fleet managed to arrive behind the Hive fleet, once 1 trillion bioships were killed in constant guerrilla strikes. At the same time, the leading elements of the Hive fleet had managed to push back the defense fleet and begin landing their feeders onto the verdant worlds of the Satis system, only to encounter the bulk of the Lamenters, plus the Lancefire Knights, the Auxiliary regiments, the Adeptus Auroritas, Titans and Tarantula turrets, plus 2,200 Tech Marines in control of 220,000 Guardian Walkers. It was a giant shooting gallery now, and I began using the Nova cannons to break up the larger concentrations of remaining bioships. The local PDF and militia units were hidden in armored bunkers and manning the walls of the human cities, and thus they were barely damaged by the invasion. Instead, my troops used field fortifications of steel cages filled with rock and plates of blackstone, taking the high ground where possible and covering them with bastion force fields and theater void shields against orbital attack. Thousands of strike drones covered our army from the air, unleashing volleys of missiles or dropping incendiary bombs, while our Aquila fighters contested the sky against scores of gargoyles and other Tyranid flyers. Having thousands of Hydra-class anti-air vehicles helped as well, barrages of multi-lasers and autocannons supporting the troops against air attacks, or delivering unforgiving fire upon light Tyranid units that entered close range. The most impactful were still the armed sentinels, which provided close support to our infantry, both with long-range lasguns or heavy bolters, or up close with flamers and chainswords. Despite all these, 3 Hive cities were overrun by a new type of Tyranid biotitan called Morlock, which dug deep under the ground to emerge right inside the human cities, and then allowed millions of smaller warforms to climb through the resulting tunnels. The surprise evolution was nasty, since there weren't many possible defenses against such a threat. Sure, I could and did intervene with a Tesseract and rescued most of the endangered locals, then expelled the invaders into the sun, but any other commander would have a difficult job holding the line. Necron Tesseracts were the ultimate cheat, and the Tyranids had yet to adapt to this trick. With a wary soul, I gathered my troops and sped towards Vitria, using the travel time to repair and rearm our vehicles and munitions. Although the defense of Satis was successful, we have consumed half of the total ammunition reserves and lost a few % of our forces, even a couple of Knights and Baneblades. As soon as the Tyranids reached melee range, the battlefield became a slaughter field, since fighting off 5-meter-tall bugs with scythe claws wasn't that easy, not even for Astartes. However, I did manage to capture 1,000 Tyranid biotitans for myself, and by the time we reached Vitria I had the mind shackled to my Necron control rod. The aspirants were given the task of painting each of them in the yellow colors of the Lamenters, then inscribe them with auxiliary markings, such that our troops would be able to distinguish the Xeno auxiliaries from the feral Tyranids. A dozen Ordo Xenos Inquisitors gathered to observe the bravery of the Lamenter aspirants, and debate how heretic my actions were. Meanwhile, I just rode a captured zoanthrope, using it as a levitating mount and direct the aspirants to paint a less visible spot. Here, behind the ear too, I demanded like a building inspector. "I don't think that's an ear, my lord." Aspirant Gordy muttered while climbing over spikes and thorns to reach the unpainted spot. I shrugged and floated towards the next biotitan. "Make the bleeding heart larger. And more red," I ordered on a whim. My aspirant rolled his eyes and obeyed without comment. What? The bleeding heart was the heraldry of the Lamenters, right there in the codex. A loud bolter shot filled the room, and then my flying Tyranid crashed to the floor, brains leaking from a fist-sized hole. I turned towards Sister Bella and her smoking gun. "No. You killed Kenny," I wailed in fake despair. As we approached planet Vitria, we passed by thousands of wrecks of Navy warships, floating dead in space, many of them engulfed in Tyranid ooze and ichor, and sporting deep scars and gouges from gigantic claws or teeth. It was as if a blender had caught this battle fleet and spat it out devoid of any life. And as it happens, it was all my fault. I have been victorious, and possibly too much so. The Tyranid hive mind was adaptable, and the lessons of its defeats were imparted instantly over stellar distances, such that other hive fleets did better next time. On the glass planet, a single hive city still held, with less than 300 guard regiments still alive and defending the walls. The capital city of Silica had tall walls made of obsidian, and the ground was also hardened glass, the result of a solar flare that transformed this world from a deadly desert death world with murderous feline predators into a civilized world on a sterile planet made of glass. And in front of the armored gate, a giant Tyranid titan was battling Brother Semnai for sport, smacking him around with ease. I've heard of the Tyranid swarmlord, the response of the hive mind to dangerous individuals or species. The immortal beast, armored and armed with 4 indestructible bone sabers that could cut through metal or force fields with equal ease. Well, Semnai wasn't the commander of this warzone for his gentle smile. This guy had been in the Death Watch for a few centuries, and he was now equipped with some of the best equipment available to humanity in this era. I know, because I made sure of this. Power armor of master-class design, plated over with blackstone and diamondoid chitin from other Tyranid titan shells, atomantic shielding and a Rosarius Faith's shield, plus a null wand to keep warp shenanigans away. The null wand was also the single reason why Semnai was still alive, as the Swarmlord's psychic disruption field over its bones were dissipated harmlessly, in proximity with the nullifying wand. Having fun again, Brother Semnai? I asked him via the sounding board. Grr. We're losing badly, my lord. And this damned beast is too strong, he exclaimed as he vanished from an incoming attack and arrived beside me. I tested the Tyranid boss gently with the Tesseract, only to find it covered by a protective psychic screen that prevented its capture. Damn it. I hated when my cheats stopped working. Anyways, I had my own boss to send. A second later, a Psi Titan appeared in front of the Hive City gates, already glowing from the faith powers of Sister Stern. Al-Besalam should be enough to deal with this monster. Elsewhere in the system, my fleet was already engaging the Tyranid Hive fleet from behind, scoring hundreds of bioship kills every second. Semnai groaned in a tired voice and sat beside me on the plasteel dais, to watch the boss duel on the big screen. I can't believe I'm still alive. This creature is possibly as strong as Primarch, or a greater demon. The lamenter lamented in a lamenting tone. I glanced towards my brother Captain for a second, then returned to the task of rescuing the remaining humans from the infested planet. The creature was toying with you, brother. The hive mind has sent it to oppose me, after all. I explained in a level voice, already considering a dozen scenarios in mind. Humanity has suffered horrific losses at Vitria, and Silica City was probably left standing as a message to me, or the Emperor. Possibly both. Its hunger will not be denied, and killed swarm creatures were simply disposable and expendable. In fact, there would have been little reason to assault a vitrified world, devoid of any life except humans. That showed that humanity itself was the target, and possibly the object lesson of this strike. You're saying, the Swarmlord could have won at any time, my lord? Captain Chiron wondered from my other side. A strike/combo from the sword-wielding Tyranid proved my point, as the Psi Titan was bashed back and crashed into the Hive City gates. The destroyer fired back, first a death pulse with merely splashed the chitin armor of the Bio-Titan, then a black beam from its Sinistrum Anima weapon, which burned away half of the Swarmlord. However, the Tyranid boss didn't die, and just stood still as its flesh regenerated as super speed. In a minute, the Swarmlord recovered and screeched a loud psychic shout of defiance. Wait. Don't fire again, it just wants to adapt to the Psy-Cannon, I urged the blank Princeps as I retrieved Sister Ordella and rose to my feet. Lord Pef? The silent sister asked with a wondering voice while examining the holoscreen. I want a bone sword like that, I explained while mounting my helmet on. The bridge of the Black Lament fell silent at my ludicrous claim, but I simply transported myself and Pariah Ordella directly on Vitria, and on the spiky neck of the Tyranid Swarmlord. The shock of losing contact with the hive mind, due to the Omega-level null aura of Ordella only incapacitated the creature for a second, but it was enough. I simply struck the beast with my Necron control rod then teleported away, leaving the mind shackles to dive and infect the Tyranid boss from the inside. Filaments of exotic Necron scarabs and living rock wires spread inside the Biotitan, stealing away its independence and self-control. A few seconds later, the psychic shield also dropped and the Swarmalord vanished inside my Tesseract, to be fully converted into a loyal Xeno auxiliary leader. Inside the Silica City I began depositing a few million orcs, and let them enjoy their last hours of freedom, and pillaging the ruins of this former human world. Glassy bits. They cut good. Bugs all around, with big spike things. The orcs commented among them, as they began to armor themselves with looted equipment left behind by the Vitrian Dragoons, the local guard regiment. Devoid of the wise leadership of their swarmlord, the Tyranids rushed towards the scent of life and blood of the orcs, and soon enough flak batteries and las cannons from the wall defenses began firing torrents of Daku at the incoming bugs. Billions upon billions of deformed bioorganisms descended onto Vitria, while I gathered the surviving navy and other ships in the system beside my fleet. Tech priests and tech marines, as well as engineers and other adepts began emergency repairs for the more salvageable ships, while the more damaged ones were collected in my Tesseract labyrinth as prize derelicts. Out of the 9 Navy battle fleets, totaling an impressive 83 battleships and thousands of smaller vessels when they arrived, barely 30 battleships were still combat capable, while a dozen were only worth the adamantium of their hulls by now. While waiting for the Tyranids to throw themselves into the glass trap, and the orcs to enjoy a last good fight, I began scrolling through the combat logs of the damaged ships, to find out how things got so bad. Some inevitable incompetence from the Navy admirals and captains was understandable, while poor maintenance and weaker weaponry were inherent conditions for any Navy ship. Still, humanity had lost about 70% of its naval and ground forces in this battle, and all of this in only 2.5 weeks, until I managed to eliminate the Satis tendril and make my way to Vitria. Of course, some units got away somewhat better. The Sisters of Battle and the Inquisitorial stormtroopers had barely lost a quarter of their numbers, while the Lancefire Knights and the Lamenter aspirants took slightly less than 20% losses. That meant 19 knights, many of them my brothers and sisters in flesh, will never get to meet Justine after she returned to life. From the 800 dead aspirants, almost 100 were my own sons, who made the final sacrifice for a better tomorrow. I wasn't happy at all. Victory still felt like ash in my mouth, even as the Exterminatus torpedo engulfed Vitria and glassed the place once again, lighting up a giant funeral pyre for my children and a trillion of my enemies in my wake. My fleet departed for Hive-World Asphadex, in the Cryptus system. Crossing through the Tyranid silence was hard on everyone in the fleet, if for different reasons. 30 billion people awaited death or salvation on that world, not only from the third Tyranid tendril, but also from the Necrons sleeping under the surface. I sat in my room with a grim heart, when Sister Magda_Grace entered, her entire body glowing within the light. I know Sister Darcy asked her to console me, but I wasn't in need for an intervention. Lord Lancefire, do not lose faith, she urged me while drawing my Amasec bottle away. Kane sniffed at the intruder for a second, then lowered his head on my shoulder again. I just sighed and took out a fresh bottle from my dimensional storehouse. Just, don't talk, Lady Grace. My faith is not getting smaller, I just need to arrange the memories of my dead relatives in my mind. And I'm sure your order lost plenty of sisters on Vitria as well. I muttered in a grim voice, then gulped the bitter Amasec to keep company with the bitter taste in my mouth. The valiant Kanona sighed softly, then drank a bit from her own bottle. As my fleet sped silently through the void for the next battle, me and the new guest drank our sorrow away, in silence. Lord Commissar Kane was not happy. By every single rule of the universe he should have been long since dead, by claw or bite or bolt, even old age. Instead, his body was still in its prime, barely a day over 30 years old. The Adeptus Munitorum had already decreed that Commissar Kane was to be considered alive and well even when presented with clear evidence to the contrary. So far, he had been declared lost in space, devoured by Tyranids, chopped to bits by orcs, fallen into a warp vortex, blown apart by a volcano, drowned in a massive tidal wave, even enslaved by the Dark Elder. But to nobody's surprise, Kane had always survived. Even now, when his new Mordian_Iron_Guard regiment was being overrun by Genestealers in the Underhive of Phodia, the capital of Hive World Asphadex. Nobody really expected him to actually die. After all, the regulation of the Imperium stated that he could never die. Slashing left and right with his relic sword called Peace, Commissar Kane advanced to the front lines, to lend a hand to his brave guardsmen. Good men, all of them. So brave. Thought coursed through his mind, as he kept watch for any cowards or defectors. Fortunately, the Iron Guard had excellent recruiting standards and the guardsmen died with fury in their eyes, even as the corrupted mutants sliced them apart with their impossibly sharp claws. Not sharp enough to block Peace. Nothing was. Damn sword could cut steel or bone with same deceptive ease. Damn lancefire. Why did you have to give me this crazy sword? Kane complained as he drew his blessed Inferno pistol and blew a hole through a giant gene stealer, with tendrils coming out of his mouth. Better make sure the larger Xenos didn't reach the weak flesh of the Mordians. At his back, the last pair of Amazons kept watch from their armed sentinel walkers, making sure that nothing attacked him from behind. Keelia and Mirage, the last of his Katakan bodyguards still alive after a century of service, were mostly machines by now, their limbs and organs replaced with bionic components following scores of crippling injuries. Beside the giant chain swords, each sentinel had a las cannon arm, and those artillery-class weapons sliced through a dozen enemy ranks each shot. To the right, his own children formed the Chrome Company, all wearing burnished power armor with pauldrons made of blackstone. Using multi-melters and storm bolters, his children had a field day in these dark and polluted catacombs, as they held the line strong and blocked any attempt at envelopment. Sadly, to the left the situation wasn't good at all, as the Mordians lacked sentinels or power armor, and were thus getting massacred by the damned Gene Stealer cultists. Just then, a trio of large broodlords burst through the rusted walls and crashed into the weakened left flank, creating a dangerous breach. Kane drew back a few steps to analyze the situation and try to find an escape route. It seemed this battle was lost, once more. Reserves, strike to the left, he ordered while sneakily retreating towards the right, where the Chrome Company should be able to escort him out of this bloody mess. The last Mordian battalion charged bravely into the maws of the Gene Stealer broodlords, while the Amazons focused fire on the middle broodlord. An Iron Guard sergeant jumped bravely right into a giant maw, then detonated his melter bomb, while a second broodlord fell on its side due to losing a knee to the Amazons' las cannons. However, the last broodlord wasn't scared at all, and plowed through the final guard battalion right toward Kane. Damn it. Why me? Kane complained inward, while shooting the second shot of the Inferno pistol, and only burning out a single arm of the Gene Stealer boss. Kane slammed the pistol back into the hip holster and grit his teeth. I was leaving, why do you have to follow me? He cried inside. Hold strong, for the Emperor, he shouted outward, since morale was quite important, even in defeat. Especially in defeat. A measured retreat would be much better than a panicked rout. Some people might survive that way, especially himself. The monster jumped forward and slashed wide with its diamond talons, then gulped the poor Commissar whole. This is it. I am dead. Kane thought as the maw closed around him and began crushing his light armor. Dash. Huh? It seems luck is not enough, after all. I commented out loud, while storing the brave Commissar in my tesseract. Woo? Canis argued at my side. My wise wolf might be right. I did change this man's luck, or perhaps I was part of Kane's story now? Everyone deserved a Deus Ex Machina rescue, and my Titan Legion deploying right now on Asphadex was even named after this trope. Still, that kind of dedicated targeting on the part of the hive mind, it didn't sit well with me. The last broodlord had intentionally ignored easier targets just to reach the good Commissar, possibly in an attempt to shatter morale or weaken the defenses of this planet. Ever learning and adapting, the damn Xeno-godling. With a flick of my fingers, the Iron Guard was returned to their barracks, while my tech marines continued the task of clearing the underhive, and get some live training too. Aspirants in their new armed sentinels and the propellementers with their dreadnoughts Leviathans formed the main force striking towards the Psycho Gene Stealer Patriarch, at the bottom of the hive city. I kept a lazy watch over my troops, not that I expected any injuries against such weak opponents. My children and I trained on space hulks after all, without any armor or heavy weapons. Today it was merely a warm-up, As my fleet tried to reduce the number of Tyranids approaching the planet from below the galactic plane, Lady Cassandra commanded the harassing fleet this time, from the Singularity battleship, while I had the task of creating a strong anvil to crush the bugs with, anchored by the Black Lament fortress. The Genostealers themselves would be considered mere biomass and devoured by the Tyranids once they made landfall, their purpose fulfilled by sowing rebellion and sedition inside the human defenses. But for that, the Sororitas and the Inquisitors in my fleet were now scouring and interrogating the nobility in the upper spires, using their Jokero-made detectors to filter out infiltrators and infected among the rulers of this world. Some of the nobles, including the governor, tried to fight back, urging their house enforcers to resist, but since each Inquisitor had at least a Death Watch company as escorts, plus thousands of battle sisters and their own retinues of agents, interrogators, assassins and tech priests, well, it rained blood. Meanwhile, the stockpiles of vehicles and munitions were being transferred onto the surface, while cooperating leaders were tasked with recruiting 10,000 PDF regiments to help defend the planet from the incoming bugs. With less than a month remaining, the training of the new soldiers would be rather low, and they would lack modern weapons or even standard guard equipment. But hollow metal spears and spinning flails weren't that high of technology that local factories couldn't produce, and even plasteel helmets and chest plates should help protect the PDF troops to some extent. 100 new manufactorums were converted from local factories to start producing new hellguns and heavy las cannons, while the chemical factories were being repurposed to produce explosive and incendiary munitions. Luckily, I did have thousands of tech priests to oversee the militarization process, while the Hive world would easily afford millions of tech servitors to be converted from the local criminals and gangs. A few days later, I gathered my staff and the local commanders for a strategy meeting. "Commissar Kane, my old friend," I exclaimed over the holotable as the brave man gulped his third glass of amasec. "Yes?" he asked, a bit fearful. "In recognition for your devotion to the Emperor, and your formidable service record, I hereby promote Lord Commissar Kane to the rank of General Commissar," I commanded with a glance towards my Inquisitor wife. Lady Valane Lancefire grimaced for a second and nodded, a bit too slow. She wasn't happy then. But I knew better. "Me?" Kane wondered while looking around for a hole to hide into. "Yes, Lord Kane. You will take command of the local troops, roughly 10,000 regiments being raised to defend this Hive world, a meager 100 million men with nearly no modern weapons. My own forces will support you, wherever the fight is thicker or Titan-sized enemies are present," I explained in a polite tone. In a few seconds, the man changed a dozen faces until he realized he wouldn't have to lead from the front line anymore. It wouldn't be possible to command so many troops from the front anyways. A bit more relaxed, he set down his empty glass and leaned back into his chair. With a glance towards the enormous holomap depicting the situation on and around Asphadex, the new General Commissar turned towards me and observed me for a long minute. "Why me, my lord?" he asked eventually. "There are a dozen reasons, Lord Kane, but the most important is that the Hive mind fears you. And if such potent enemy fears you, then you're the best man for the job. I dare say, there are few individuals in the entire galaxy that the commanding intelligence over the Tyranids actually fears," I answered with a wry grin. All around the holotable, Astartes, sisters, generals and inquisitors focused their gazes on this powerful menace that even the Hive mind feared. "That broodlord," it jumped towards me. "Priority target?" The commissar wondered, mostly to himself. I shrugged carelessly, leaving the man to his delusions. I knew the man quite well, and he was mostly motivated by a powerful survival instinct, aided by a great amount of luck. And if the enemy was strong, that meant his survival depended on defeating the enemy, rallying troops and raising their morale. But no matter his reasons, once properly motivated, the man was quite a genial commander who had trampled over orc bosses, chaos lords or Genestealer patriarchs by mere lucky aim or superb swordsmanship. And his chrome company was almost at the level of a Death Watch bodyguard, the lucky survivors of his Katakan concubines donated by myself nearly 150 years ago. I was also certain the Emperor did have plans for the good Commissar, possibly something in the vein of a new Adeptus Terra order, that would bind the security of the Imperium with the Commissar's personal safety. As the saying went, the Emperor was always watching, and Kane did have a holy relic Aquila marker glowing on the guard of his nice chronophage sword named Peace. "Lead us to victory, General Kane," Lady Regina shouted, raising her own amasec glass in salute. Left without an avenue to escape, Kane raised his own glass and drank his sorrow away. Then, we began planning how to massacre the filthy Xenos, and people began throwing ideas and stratagems forward. Some of them wouldn't work on Tyranids, but humanity had plenty of other enemies. I had already located the Necron Magnovitrium weapon hidden under Phodia, and thus victory in this Cryptus campaign was already certain. I made sure to remember every proposed trick or strategy, and began planning the next war, after this hive fleet was destroyed. For in this grim dark future, there was only war. The end. Inquisitor Amblevale took another glance at her psychic-linked diary, the empty pages longing to be filled with more words, while the Archeo stylus in her hand quivered with anticipation. With a sad smile, she began drawing new words and schematics, in High Gothic. With a subtle twist of the warp, the words were encrypted and encoded with the Auto-Xenos engrams as to deny the enemy access to critical data. Hopefully. To the God Emperor of mankind and my fellow Inquisitors, I hereby testify to the events of the invasion _of the Stygios sector, as witnessed with my own senses. As some of you may know, my new mission had been to observe and document the life and feats of Pef Lancefire, and his forces, at first at the order of Lord Inquisitor, redacted, and later with follow-up orders from High Lord of Terror, redacted, and Primarch, redacted. I will not go into much detail about Pef Lancefire himself, not only for my personal safety, as he is certainly able to observe me at any time due to the Xenos artifacts like, redacted, and Primarch, redacted, but simply because it is not relevant. Lord Lancefire himself has claimed to abstain as much as possible from cheating, as he calls the use of his powers or artifacts, mainly because he intends for humanity to achieve the same feats with their own skill and strength. In this regard, I can indeed attest to Lord Lancefire's minimum use of outside forces, and instead using and abusing his own military forces to a degree not known possible or even theoretically proposed, not for human forces at least. Of course, the Lamentor's Xeno auxiliary units are not human, and they did provide a huge impact as force multiplier and distraction, as well as ambush and simple meat grinding units on the front lines, in addition to warp phenomena suppression or special abilities. Also, the feats of Primarch, redacted, onto the battlefields of the Stygios sector are also not the purview of this document, nor could they be, since the words would self-erase at the same speed I could write them down. Firstly, I will describe the forces brought into play by House Lancefire and the Lamentor's Astartes chapter, although some leeway should be given due to, redacted, and, redacted, abilities of Lord Lancefire to resupply or recover troops in the field. The Lamentors are indeed still Codex compliant and their battle brothers' numbers have never exceeded 900 in the field, although liberal use of tech marines, about 2,200 observed, and their thousands of Guardian walkers, roughly 200,000 observed, did provide extreme levels of firepower and suppression comparable to a full Astartes legion. However, the Lamentors themselves are rarely deployed as frontline units, as their doctrine calls of the use of the Lamentor's auxiliary forces as the principal units to hold the field. Human auxiliary units were mainly of Katakan genetic stock with sizable elements from Valhalla and Cadia descendants, and were organized as follows. Heavy infantry, 600 regiments, or about 600 million troops, with integrated logistics and walkers, about 600,000 armed sentinels of various types, artillery, 100 regiments with overstrength numbers if compared to the nominal Imperial Guard estimated 200,000 artillery guns, plus anti-air and air-to-ground vehicles, roughly 400,000 ground attack aircraft, armor, 300 regiments of oversized strength, roughly 300,000 light tanks, mostly Chimera and Weasel patterns, 30,000 heavy tanks mostly Ragnarok patterns and some Lehman Russ, 1,300 super heavy tanks of various Baneblade pattern, mainly Doomhammer models armed with twin magma cannons. Of note in the above lists, the vehicles themselves are not the standard patterns used by Astra Militarum and other Imperium of Man's units. Lord Lancefire has taken great care to upgrade these machines with new or archaeotech, or specs, weapons, armor and shields, plus various bits like enhanced tracks and logic engines, thus giving his troops at least an order of magnitude of superiority versus similar vehicles from other forces. Adding to this were Forge Machine and Forge, redacted, allied forces, plus the Knights of House Lancefire with about 500 knights of various models mainly armed with volcano lances. The Mechonicus units were rather secretive about their numbers and capabilities, but I did observe roughly 300 Titans in the field, plus assorted support and skirmish troops mostly made up of combat servitors, estimated over 1 billion, Scutari, over 10 million, and battle automata, over 10,000, plus a few, redacted, siege engines. Various other allied forces were present, most notably the Adeptus Auroritas with 6 priories, roughly 6 million troops with tanks and walkers support, plus the Silent Sisters, redacted, Vigil, with their own 800 knight-sized walkers of, redacted, pattern, the Holy Inquisition's stormtrooper regiments, as well as the Iron Hands Astartes chapter, and all their successor chapters, 24, redacted, Astartes kill teams, redacted, and, redacted, Assassinorum, redacted, Clade agents, 6, redacted, Augur teams for psychological ops, and lastly 2, redacted, human and cyborg operatives for noosphere surveillance. For space and space superiority combat, the forces gathered to fight the great enemy invasion consisted of Lamentor's strike force of 5 battle barges, 5 battleships, including the Gloriana-class Singularity, 62 heavy cruisers, including 40 drop cruisers, and 3 Universe-class fleet carriers, carrying roughly 5,000 starfighters, 1,000 bombers and 1,000 corvettes, plus the Black Lament superfortress, then the Lancefire House Navy, which consisted of 32 battleships, 14 battle cruisers, 491 cruisers and 87 escort carriers, carrying roughly 400,000 interceptors and 40,000 torpedo corvettes, various support, repair, supply and logistics vessels, over 1,000 ships, and lastly the Adeptus Mechonicus Mac and the Basilicon fleet with 7 battleship-sized arcs, 95 cruisers, 2 forge ships and 4 platform XXL carriers, estimated capacity, 4 million servitor-brain combat space drones and 4,000 corvettes. Note that nearly every capital ship deployed was upgraded with Nova cannons and thick, redacted, armor and extensive auto-targeting point defense batteries, plus blank bridge crew, blank machine spirits and improved Geller field coverage. The other Astartes forces present were not quite as heavily armored or armed as the Lamentors, which did cause them significant casualties, not that I've noticed any complaints, quite the contrary. Immediate replacements were provided from the wounded soldiers in the auxilia, often during high-intensity combat. I did also notice a large increase in Tech Marine presence among the Iron Hands forces, generally at parity with the regular Battle Brothers numbers. Sadly, I cannot go into detail about the extent of the Xeno auxiliary units deployed, mostly because of sheer numbers, distance or psychosuppression effects involved, or entropic cascade and temporal distortions in the case of the Hood. Auxilia Orcs were easier to observe, but I believe Lord Lancefire used the greenskins as mere distraction or amusement instead of actual combat units, considering how often I heard him snicker or even laugh loudly once the Orcs were being deployed. Note that, redacted, or redacted, artifacts, or perhaps alpha-level psycho-based telepathy is required to direct such Xeno auxiliaries against an enemy. Bribing doesn't work. As for the local forces of the PDF, Astra Militarum or the Imperial Navy, they were of course present in large numbers in the Stygius sector, at least in the beginning. However, considering that latter analysis demonstrated losses of upwards of 1 trillion soldiers per day sector-wide in the early phases of the invasion, I uphold Lord Lancefire's decision to ignore local units and instead focusing on taking the fight directly to the enemy, instead of attempting to reinforce the disintegrating Imperial forces in the sector. Simply consider the amount of invaders in the Dobash system, for example. The enemy had deployed 6 Titan legions, 9 Knight houses and over 20,000 tanks obtained from Forge World Road Delpha, accompanied by 18 hosts of, redacted, demons and 3 entire corrupted Space Marine legions. Local Imperial forces were overwhelmed in minutes, and once the, redacted, and, redacted, rituals had began, even the most loyal Imperial units had began defecting or suiciding en masse, not to mention shooting at anyone they could see. In the void the situation at Tarkhan Hive World was even worse, as the last great enemy had gathered a giant fleet that outnumbered the relief forces 100 to 1. Of course, they did not outnumber the Tyranid hive fleets released against them by Lord Lancefire and his, redacted, Xenofriend, an event which indeed created the setting and conditions for a latter victory against the unified, redacted, front. Regarding the relatively low casualties from the civilian population of the invaded hive worlds, often in the thousands instead of trillions, this can be explained by Lord Lancefire's softer heart, compared to a regular Inquisitor, and his liberal use of Xeno, redacted, and, redacted, artifacts, as well as several interventions from Primarch, redacted, and the Demonifuge, redacted, plus unconfirmed reports of glowing saints or faith miracles in places I couldn't observe directly. Regarding the Eldar fleets and Wraithbone Titans deployment during the invasion, plus the rumors of divine intervention by several Eldar deities or avatars, a separate report has been sent to the Ordo Xenos Conclave at Egida Station, along with the necessary document files, picked captures and psychotrance memory crystals of the events, in particular my own recordings of a Revenant_Titan in combat against a, redacted, horde. A secondary report of the Forge Venatorian Tech Priests, Titans and, redacted, Fortress and their suspected, redacted, Xeno Overlords involvement has also been sent in triplicate, after the first copy has vanished in transfer. As for the curious case of Major Slimarbo of the Special Operations Group, and his claims of 44 Titans and 97 Knights destroyed by his own hand, I could only confirm 6 Titan kills via direct observation. Another 56 cases have been documented via battlefield auguries and after-action reports of nearby forces. However, it is my own presumption that our Major has in fact understated his feats during the invasion, since the mysterious disappearance of the enemy's 5th Titan Legion during the Prismata_System campaign can have little other explanation. Considering that Major Slimarbo is also a blank and has been observed to, redacted, himself and displace objects with ease, I consider the man as dangerous as Lord Lancefire himself, at least on a personal scale. Hopefully, due to the man's marriage into the Lancefire house, we do not need to worry about tracking him all over the galaxy as well. In conclusion, the combined intervention of House Lancefire, the Lamenters chapter and the allied forces is estimated to have caused 97% losses to the physical invaders, including ships and vehicles, and 23% permanent losses to insubstantial invaders, as 67% non-permanent losses that could be restored with great effort by the great enemy. I could also confirm the death of Warlord Kardoff and all of his officers and command staff. However, despite our best efforts, the arch-traitor Araman escaped once more, even from a direct hit with a, redacted, assassin or impulse. A note of caution, for those of our rank who might attempt to copy or emulate the feats of Lord Lancefire in other places. Make sure your Astartes units consist of blank space marines or have been completely protected via null rods and similar means. Like my own, redacted, rod. Obtain the support and presence of a large number of silent sisters, blank officers/retinue too. Employ the services of, redacted, or, redacted, assassin clade, or the use of God Emperor's own, redacted, titans. Get your own, redacted, fortress. Try to obtain, redacted, or, redacted, artifacts as to deploy Tyranid biotitans at crucial points. Ordo Xenos rank or rogue trader warrant required. Befriend one Primarch and ask him to join your quest. There are at least, redacted, to pick from. Obtain Mechanica's support. Titans are nice, but only if they're on your side. Ask Lord Lancefire to lend a hand. Obviously the safest path. As for the aftermath of the Stygios invasion, Lord Lancefire is still involved with the cleanup and the closing of various warp rifts, although other Imperial forces like the, redacted, Astartes under Ordo Malleus and Primarch Johnson with his 42 Space Marine chapters have also arrived to help. It is of course too late for the 91 worlds burned to a crisp via Exterminatus Ordnance, as well as the 5 Imperial worlds that had been dragged into the warp by the retreating, redacted, forces. The Stygios Crusade also has the honorable mention of awarding the highest numbers of Astartes badges ever recorded, including over 4,000 Imperialis, over 3,000 Machina_Opus and 731 Imperial_Laurel badges. Hundreds of other awards like the Marksman's Honor and Iron Halo shields were also awarded for extraordinary feats of skill and bravery. Furthermore, 98 Lamenters badges called Rit Sanguinatus Mori were awarded post-mortem to fallen Lamenter Marines, including all their apothecaries that did not possess blank genes. By the powers invested in me, I hereby end this communique and send it to the higher lords in the Imperium for evidence. Follow-up reports inbound as more data is gathered. Amberley Vale, Holy Inquisitor of the Imperial Faith, Ordo Xenos and Ordo, redacted. Thought for the day: life is not measured in years, but by the deeds of men.